Elsewhere in Washington, Gordon Gray is succeeded by Frank Pace Jr. as Secretary of the Army. Chief Justice Vinson swears in the 37-year-old former director of the budget as members of the cabinet, and the whole Pace family look on. His new boss, Defense Secretary Johnston, congratulates the new secretary, as does his predecessor, who then heads for 2 new jobs. Mr. Gray's first job will be as special assistant to the president. His second, the presidency of North Carolina University. At Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army parades its might for its commander-in-chief and prominent American and Canadian civilian guests as a 2-day joint orientation program gets underway. The infantry's famed Minute of Murder, with every gun firing simultaneously, opens the infantry attack. Army Secretary Pace gives the president a model tank before Mr. Truman goes to Eglin Field, Florida. Next day, he sees the Air Force in action, from giant B-36s to the smallest jet fighters. B-36 drops its still secret payload of over 200 quarter-ton bombs, riding a straight line of death.
In the Pentagon building, Thomas K. Finletter is sworn in as Secretary of the Air Force by Defense Secretary Johnston. America's chiefs of staff see the former head of the President's Air Policy Commission, which recommended a 70-group Air Force, congratulated by his predecessor, W. Stuart Symington, who then leaves the Pentagon to receive a final salute from the service he commanded. Later, Chief Justice Vinson swears Mr. Symington into a new job, chairmanship of the National Security Resources Board, charged with the planning of mobilization of all U.S. resources against emergency. 2 final parades mark graduation at West Point. First, the graduating class itself goes on a farewell review. Then it reviews the rest of the Corps of Cadets. The United States Military Academy's 148th commencement is climaxed in the field house. There's a special cheer for honor man William DeGraff, a combat veteran who entered West Point a first lieutenant and is graduated a second. Graduates dismissed.
The White House becomes world news headquarters as U.S. government leaders, congressional, military, and diplomatic, confer with President Truman on the hostilities in Korea. Tension runs high. Will the United States back down or act? Then White House reporters are called in for a statement, ending suspense and proclaiming that our gravest challenge since the war has been boldly met. Author of the statement, Harry S. Truman, leaves for Blair House across the street. A fateful decision confidently and courageously made. Against the Red invaders from North Korea, U.S. planes and U.S. ships are ordered into action. Based in Japan, U.S. Air Force jets and Mustangs are within striking distance of Korea. In action so far, our airmen have shot down numbers of Russian Yak fighters attacking South Korea and are continuing to support the reorganized Republican ground forces. Warships of the 7th Fleet are ordered to Korean waters to smash Red amphibious landings in South Korea. Aboard the carrier Valley Forge, in these scenes just released by the Defense Department, VF-51 and 52 jet squadrons rehearse operations in mid-Pacific, which may soon be the real thing off Korea. British naval forces in the area have now been added to U.S. strength, responding to United Nations appeal. the Security Council takes the strongest action in its history. With Russia absent, it calls upon all members for military help against the Korean Reds. America's chief delegate, Warren Austin, offers the resolution and it is put to a vote. With Yugoslavia opposed and India and Egypt not participating, the Council votes 7-1 to recommend armed support to the Korean Republic. Next day, at a meeting of the Reserve Officers Association, President Truman, in a formal address, speaks of the service the citizen owes his country. After his speech, the association's president asks the audience a question.
Gentlemen, do we, the reserve officers of the armed forces, and our countrymen, support our Commander-in-Chief in the dynamic action which he took yesterday?
Mr. Truman responds.
Gentlemen, we face a serious situation. We hope we face it in the cause of peace. The only reason for the action which was taken on advice of all the brains that I could muster was hoping, always hoping, that we'll finally arrive at the peace in the world which we anticipated when we created the United Nations. That's the only reason for the action. Thank you very much.
President Truman arrives at Hickam Field, Hawaii, after an overnight flight from San Francisco and is greeted by Hawaii's Governor Ingram Steinbach. The president, carrying the traditional welcome lei rather than wearing it round his neck, heads for a luncheon of military and civilian leaders in Pearl Harbor. The chief executive tells his audience that he believes that the peoples behind the Iron Curtain want peace and that war is not inevitable. Then he takes off for Wake Island, a tiny coral atoll 2,300 miles away. The president's plane arrives at dawn, and America's commander-in-chief is met by his Far Eastern commander, General McArthur, as flash bulbs pop and newsreel cameras grind. A tiny coral building near the spot the Japs landed is the site of the 3-hour meeting attended by top officials, including Secretary of the Army, Frank Pace, Jr., and the chairman of America's Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Bradley. Before leaving Wake, the president pins a 4th cluster on the Distinguished Service Medal of General MacArthur. As the principals leave, they announce that their conference discussed terms necessary to bring peace and security to the Pacific. The cause of the United Nations is speeded forward in a major conference on the historic Pacific island of Wake.
At the Pentagon, the Army honors comedian Joe E. Brown for outstanding and conspicuous patriotic service in bringing happiness and entertainment to the soldiers of the United States Army. Secretary Pace presents the citation and gets a man-sized sample of the famous Brown grin.
Washington, President Truman honors 3 servicemen for heroism in Korea. The Medal of Honor goes to Lieutenant Lloyd L. Burke, who grenaded 3 enemy bunkers, then carrying a machine gun wiped out 100 more Reds when his company was pinned down. General Bradley sees Corporal Rodolfo P. Hernandez receive the same award for attacking an onrushing enemy force, though wounded and alone, and killing 6 with his bayonet after running out of ammunition. Marine Sergeant Harold E. Wilson also receives the Medal of Honor for rallying and rescuing his men, though seriously wounded, when their post was overrun by the enemy. Then Mr. Truman congratulates the gallant winners of America's highest honor.
It's every man's dream come true, a jet Jeep helicopter. It's powered by 2 tiny jets which will keep it aloft 2 hours without refueling. The jet Jeep is a new Army possession, but as you can see, it's got plenty of peacetime possibilities. The Army will use it primarily for observation work. Army Secretary Frank Pace and high brass see the plane go through its maneuvers, including a no-hands demonstration by pilot Lou Hartwig. As for landing, the jet Jeep has none of the problems of the YB-52 we just saw. The plane whizzes straight down and lands practically in the lap of the Warner Pathé cameraman.